Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this special edition of Bang the Book Radio for Friday, July 26th. We're going to chat UFC 240 with Christian Pina of the Sports Gambling Podcast. He also has a very good preview for us over at bangthebook.com. As you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB, the number 200, is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook, 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. We've been on every day this week on Bang the Book Radio. Monday, Thursday, Better's Box. Tuesday, Wednesday, talk college football with Rolf Michaels and Lockie Lockerson, respectively. Next week, we'll be on every day as well. So we'll have a lot of stuff to come your way next week, including a new edition of the Better's Box on Monday. And at that point, I'll let you know what the schedule looks like for this week. So with that, we'll go ahead and bring on Christian Pina of the Sports Gambling Podcast to chat here about UFC 240 in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Christian, how's it going today, man?
Good, man. You said it. It's only a game until you bet it, and it's only a fight until you bet it, man. And we look at these last couple cards and events, and truthfully, the free ones are a little bit better than this. There's a great main event that I'm sure even the most casual of UFC fans can get excited about in Max Holloway going up against Frankie Edgar in what should be, a really good fight and a lot closer than the number indicates. But we're looking at a lot of kind of lopsided and big favorites here on this event and, on this pay-per-view card that, frankly, the next free event is probably, top to bottom a little bit more stacked. And certainly last week's free event a little bit more stacked top to bottom as well.
Now, as we know, transparency very important in this industry. Full disclosure important as well. And a lot of the things that we talked about last week didn't really seem to come through. Arlovsky picks up that unanimous decision win with 30-27 across the board. The Dan Hooker-James Vick fight maybe didn't necessarily go the way that you expected it to. What do you do in those situations? I mean, do you just sort of maybe chalk it up to one-off variants? Are you making adjustments as you go along? How do you sort of, look back at a card?
Yeah, I mean, you said it, right? I think that, when I was talking about Oleinik, that was a slight underdog bet I bet on, and I knew, it was kill or be killed, and he was either going to get knocked out or be able to get, Harris to the ground, and for the victory, and it was the other option. I think that when you look at things, the Edwards one was something I think was pretty spot on, but yeah, man, you look at Arlovsky, to me, I'll take that short-term loss for sure, knowing that maybe he's going to get another fight and I'll have another opportunity to to capitalize again. So everything is always a long game, and especially with this sport, to me, when things don't go right or, there's a loss or whatever it is, you got to look at, it's really the how, much more important than in any situation when it comes to me in my handicapping. The why and the how is so much more important than the what. But you got to look at, was the handicap right? And, the big example I can always go back to is, the over 2.5 rounds in Anderson Silva's last fight where he got hurt. Now, that was the right handicap. The bet lost, but I would make that bet again. And so you always got to look at the why. And if you, handicap something, to happen and that outcome happens and it was just something that you did not plan on, that's something you learn from. Take your lumps. I mean, look, we're talking about 40 events per year, and you're going to get some stuff right and you're going to get some stuff wrong for sure. Learn from it. Learn, much more importantly than the loss is why it did, and apply it the next go around.
Well, and as you look at that Oleinik fight, just as one example with Walt Harris, 12 seconds. I mean, what can you possibly take out of 12 seconds?
Well, it's really, exactly right. The McGregor and the Askren fight, McGregor Aldo. These are, is it a fluke? I think that the McGregor one is a little bit more fluky than the style nightmare that Masvidal was for Askren. And so when you look at the Oleinik one, look, 1,000% I knew that fight was going to be kill or be killed, either get knocked out or get him to the ground, and that could have been very easily if he was able to complete that takedown. It could have been a submission in 12 seconds. So it really went the way that I thought. It's just the, that split second of getting the takedown or a limb connecting was the difference. And so you can take, it's just that split second is all the difference between a win and a loss in this sport. And it's what makes the sport so great.
Well, we'll look for a bounce back here this week with UFC 240. And really, as you and I were talking here before we started recording, when you look up and down the main card, the story here is that we've got a lot of big favorites on the board. So, I know that a lot of people out there maybe undercapitalized, maybe don't have the bankroll to play a lot of heavy chalk. So, in your mind, as you're starting to look at this, both personally and from the client standpoint, how do you approach a card like this where you just have, so many chalky fighters?
Yeah, this goes back to the philosophy that either you agree with or you don't. And there's not a lot of people that are in between on this. And, the parlay option is one that I utilize a lot more than most professionals. That's a fact. I don't think I ever will go over a two, fighter parlay. But, I was talking with another UFC professional better this week on my podcast, Inside Vegas, Daniel Levy at Best Fight Picks. And we always go back and forth on this because he was – what the last time we talked about a year ago, he was so against the parlay, and I always tried to lay out the case that, a two fighter parlay is so different in a vacuum versus, a football parlay or anything else. And there really is value when you're able to get, 2 -300s in showcase spots back to back and knock down that juice. So I'm a proponent of them. I use them a lot more than others. It's just, the parlays are sucker bet narratives. They're the bookie's best friend narrative. I largely agree with that, except with this sport. And there's many things that make the UFC so unique to handicap. Public bet splits are a little bit different. There's not a lot of ticket volume. When you look at this fight upcoming in fight week, we have, as I look at the screen, I believe like 900 tickets been written on this main event. And you look at, compare that to a daily baseball game, a daily NBA game, and God forbid a weekly football game. And you're looking, a 20th of handle on this to this point. Limits are kept low. So when you have favorites, look, I utilize the parlay. I'm not going to go searching if there's only one, big favorite that I like on the card, and it is what it is. I think you need it to, ask yourself what type of levels that you want out of this game, and you get outs that have, an open parlay option. I know there's a ton out there in the offshore world and stuff like that. Not so much in Vegas for sure, but, diversify yourself a little bit, be selective, and don't just try to pair another big favorite without doing the work, with the one that you do. So that's how I go about handicapping it. I always kind of try to look towards the underdog and try to make a case for that at first, and at least figure out what that path to victory was and if it's likely. But with these two, kind of co-main events, it's a little bit warranted in my opinion.
All right, so as we look at this one here, the featherweight championship fight between Max Holloway and Frankie Edgar. Holloway, about a $4 favorite out there. Second biggest favorite on the main card, of course, Cyborg being the biggest favorite. Not a surprise there at all whatsoever. Is this price warranted on Max Holloway coming off of his first loss in a very, very long time?
Man, Frankie Edgar, let me say this, is by far and away my favorite UFC fighter of all time. And you can go down the line on why. An undersized guy with all the heart in the world, and the style of fights that I love, and that is point fighting and knowing exactly what to do despite being exciting, maybe being even boring. I love that type of fighter. And when you look at Frankie Edgar's accomplishments, I believe this is his, ninth title fight, looking for the strap for the third time. And look, there's a narrative here that, Holloway, I was wrong about Holloway's last fight. I didn't bet Holloway in that spot, but I thought by him not having to, cut that weight, maybe he stays there and it would be the best version of him we've ever seen. We've seen his issues with the weight cut at this weight class, depleting himself, being sick, having to pull out of fights. So we're going to go down that narrative and that road again. And, a fight with Poirier is going to take it out of you. That is for sure. Now, he is Hawaiian. He has the Hawaiian warrior spirit. Maybe more than anyone else on the UFC roster. He is he's blessed Holloway, 13 fight win streak coming into, that last loss. The other narrative that does present itself here is, one of my favorite angles to attack. I've talked about this time and time again, is betting against a fighter after a losing title fight. It's made so much sense. It's been very successful. You think about it, you have your hopes and dreams snatched. What is your motivation starting over again and all of that type of stuff. We saw this with Ngannou. It was the classic example against Derek Lewis. And, when that type of stuff happens, it's very real. A little bit of a different and unique situation here as, obviously Holloway just losing his champ status. But I mean, my God, it could be a very bad few months for a guy like Max Holloway if he loses both belts back to back. That being said, I really try not to go against Frankie Edgar just because, again, I'm a fan and I need to kind of put that aside sometimes. Everything that Frankie Edgar does, Max Holloway at this point does faster, he does stronger, and he does a little bit quicker. The path to victory for the underdog here, this is probably at this weight class the best wrestler that Max Holloway has ever fought, and the takedown threat is going to be there and what he's going to be able to do with that. So that is, definitely a path for, Frankie Edgar as the big underdog here. Holloway is going to dwarf him. There's nothing, it is what it is. Edgar is used to being the smaller guy, certainly, but it's a big size differential here for sure. There's going to be, scrambles, but Holloway, should be able to win the majority of this fight with the distance control and, dare I say, outpoint Frankie Edgar at his own game. And like I said, this is just a version of everything that Edgar does at this point in his career. Holloway just does a little bit better. So it's warranted. It's certainly a dog or pass situation. I would just go with the pass.
Now, as we look at Frankie Edgar here, I do want to ask you about this because I know that you do like to go the round prop route. That's something that you've talked about a lot here on the show, something that you've utilized quite a bit. Frankie Edgar here coming off the torn bicep, hasn't fought since April 2018, and that was a very, very quick turnaround to take on Cub Swanson. What do you think about him getting into the championship rounds here? Is this kind of an even fight through 3, and then maybe it sort of starts to tilt in Holloway's favor? Do you see a round prop? Do you see maybe a chance to get Holloway live at a better price? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're talking about two guys with some of, to the point, Frankie Edgar famously had never been finished, and, that streak came to an end. Do I think his chin is now glass? Absolutely not. And we know how hard it is to put away Max Holloway. The round props you're probably looking at a 4.5, honestly, when they're hung. I don't know if they're available widely everywhere yet, but that's what I would make the round prop at as an odds maker and as a book. Frankie Edgar by decision was basically how I built my UFC bankroll, to be completely honest with you. Much like Floyd Mayweather by decision, Frankie Edgar by decision is that version of Floyd Mayweather in the UFC, and he was for a very long time. Everything about his game is geared towards point fighting and winning decisions. And so when you look back through his career, that was, what was needed to be done. At this point, he's just a little bit of a different guy. He's not shot by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a guy who's been fighting his whole life and coming in at age 37. It's very fair to assume this is the kind of last hurrah, we'll say, on the, championship aspirations of a guy like Frankie Edgar, who I have nothing but respect and admiration for, truthfully. So it's probably going to be set at 4.5. I don't know that it would get me on board at that number and at that price, because I'm sure it's even going to be juiced to that over. Holloway by decision probably does make some sense as well, but these scrambles, they're going to be dicey. Honestly, this fight, I think it probably plays out a very close decision victory for Max Holloway. So, putting the gun to my head, I would definitely say to take that over 4.5, but it's just not something at that price that I can get on board with.
Last time Frankie Edgar was in the championship rounds, July 9th, 2016. So over 3 years ago for a fighter now in his upper 30s. So something to keep in mind here as that fight goes along. Probably don't need to spend too much time on this one. Cyborg, anywhere from a $6 or $7 favorite here against Felicia Spencer. We could maybe make an argument about how Felicia Spencer is Canadian and how the judging could come into play here. But, man, I mean, do you see any reason to gamble on the dog here?
Look, another one that is, by price alone, something of a dog or pass situation. Much like Holloway, though, Chris Cyborg falls into the category of betting against a fighter, coming off their title fight. Look, Cyborg came into this, into the sport. Of course, she's been around a lot longer, but she's basically a female version of Francis Ngannou. And that's, kind of how it was built up, just to give people a point of reference for what people thought of her game. And, to the point when she was coming up, and she, much like Rousey, the quality of division, the quality of women's mixed martial arts at the time, she was just so far ahead of and so much more strong then. And she tore apart the regional scene. And I get it. You can only, beat and do what's in front of you. But, I don't want to say the word, I don't even want to use the word overrated, but she hasn't lived up to the hype. You go down and look at her last fights, man, and you're looking at, overwhelming favorites, minus 900s, minus 1200s, I think she does like minus 1800 in one fight, right? And she's letting these girls go into decision against, a Holly Holm, who we just saw get knocked out in 3 seconds by Amanda Nunes. She's not winning fights the way that she used to. She's not winning. The quality of opponents certainly improved, but if you look down the MMA math kind of timeline, I would expect it. I did expect a lot more out of her, and it hasn't really. Say it's been a little bit of a letdown for her in her career. It's just been a little bit, lack thereof. You look at a girl, Felicia Spencer, man. If she is able to get Cyborg to the ground, I would not be shocked if she was able to take the back and win via submission. A lot of very professional, very sharp people had Nunes winning that fight by submission against Cyborg as the path to victory. It's something of the same here. There's not an overwhelming size advantage, which Cyborg usually has in this fight. I mean, the reach, let's start with the height, 2-inch height advantage. The reach is exactly even, and the leg reach is exactly even. So, look, there is a path to victory for, again, it's a dog or pass situation, and I'm just going to take the pass.
All right, so as we move down the main card here, Jeff Neal, Nico Price. This is another line this is another fight, I should say, with a pretty big line. Neal, a -350 favorite here. What about this one? Is this one priced accurately?
Yeah, this one should be a little bit of a barn burner here for sure. I mean, you look at these two guys, only 4 out of their combined 30 fights have gone to decision, and this one is unlikely to see the judges' scorecards as well. It's a really good matchup of two guys who like to finish and should entertain the fans for sure. Whoever, I mean, it sounds almost lazy to say, but the defense on the feet and who's able to apply this is probably going to come out. In a type of situation like this where two guys are going to walk to the middle, look for a finish and bang, you always want to try to side with the underdog. This one really could go either way. So, I would definitely go towards the underdog at this price here for sure. But look, Nico Price has just, made a living and making a career out of, finishing these guys along the way and looking great doing it. And I think Price by himself only gone in decision once in his UFC wins. So, if he can't get the finish, it'll be very dicey, and you never want to play that game with a big favorite like that. So definitely would lean towards the underdog on this one.
As we fill out the rest of the main card here, we got a couple of Canadian canines in the last 2 fights to talk about. Aubin-Mercier +160, and then you've got Marc-Andre Barriault in the +145 range. So we'll have the crowd support here, but both Canadians underdogs in their respective fights.
Yeah, we were talking off air, man. Like, is this Canadian judging Canadians priced into the, and a lot of them are kind of underdogs. A lot of people are trying to make the case for Olivier Aubin-Mercier. I don't see it, and I don't get it. Arman Tsarukyan is because he can, in theory, OAM may be the better wrestler. You look at this takedown average 2.6 to 1, takedown accuracy 35%, takedown defense 65% for OAM, accuracy 8%, and 53% takedown defense for Arman Tsarukyan. So this one, look, I get it why people are trying to make that, because in a chain wrestling match, anything can happen. Limbs are flying everywhere. But Tsarukyan has proved that, this is going to be a really hard ask for a guy like OAM. He is a great grappler and really better than people thought on the feet for sure. The judo is going to be the key for Arman in this one. So it's going to go back and forth, a chain wrestling fight that is going to be a little bit, if that's not your style, I don't know how much casual fans are going to like it. You'll definitely like the Nico Price fight more than this. But OAM has got to be able to, come in with the right game plan, and Tsarukyan, I think this is, if he's able to put him away along the way and look great doing it, a rocket may get strapped to his back a little bit. But look, OAM, the Canadian gangster, is who he is, right? And going in when Tsarukyan went into his debut against Islam Makhachev, I mean, we're talking about a guy that, he basically got out-wrestled at his own game. That was a really tough spot to be, a really tough ask for him. Obviously, Makhachev, if it ends in V, he's out of the Nurmagomedov family. And, Tsarukyan really, really looked good along the way, yet, just was too much too soon. This is a step back in terms of wrestling, despite what it says on paper, just because there's not, every stat kept along the regional scene here. So, look, this one, a lot of people are going to try to make the case for the dog. I would really lean with the favorite, Arman Tsarukyan here.
All right, so what about the dog in the other one then? Is Barriault going to give the fans something to cheer about here against Krzysztof Jotko?
Yeah, if you remember back, I believe his debut in the UFC was in Canada, and I thought it was a great matchup for him to come out there, light the fans up with a finish, and it did not work out. I bet him in his last spot in his debut did not work out. That's for sure. He's a finishing knockout artist, man. 8 of his 11 pro wins via the knockout and winning 3 decisions along the way. Man, Jaco is also a guy I really can't trust. I think that Barriault really should get it going in this one. But it's a little bit tough to call here for sure. Look, like I said, monster on the feet, knockout artist, but Jaco, a lot more experienced, of course, knows how to point fight a little bit more. This is going to be something of a, finish, somebody searching and headhunting for the finish while someone else is kind of trying to, stick and move, point fight. And Jaco cannot match power with him. That is for sure. The dirty boxing and all that type of stuff, the volume approach that Jaco is going to try to employ here, it's going to be the opposite on the end of Barriault. So it's going to be really interesting to see. This is the type of fight I think it makes for a great live bet. What I would do is I think that Jaco probably wins, the early rounds, the early exchanges with that volume and point, fighting. It sounds a lot easier than it is, right? But try to, get that price inflated on Barriault because the knockout could be coming at any time. The volume is certainly not there. So this is, one punch knockout power versus really no knockout power in the volume approach. So this is definitely one that makes for a live bet opportunity on Barriault if you can get the right price in between maybe the first and second round. Even a small stab if it gets, if he's losing badly in the volume exchanges in between the second and third, maybe split up your bet a little bit that way. But that's how I would look to bet this fight for sure.
All right, so the main card here on ESPN Plus, so it is on pay-per-view, even though it's probably not as good of a card as last week and probably not as good of a card as next week either. What about the prelims here? We got UFC Fight Pass and ESPN2. Anything that you do like here on the prelim card?
Yeah, let's go down to another Canadian, man. This fight is we look down, right? There's so many big favorites, and to find a little bit of value on these close ones, let's look at the Gavin Tucker and Sungwon Choi fight. Look, Gavin Tucker he really tore apart the regional scene, was a little bit hyped. He fought absolutely nobody. I spoke about this fight again on Inside Vegas this week. It's a really weird, this fight's gone back and forth a little bit. If you're into playing the market and arbitrage opportunities, this one's gone plus money on both sides, depending on what book. So there's certainly a little bit of arbitrage market opportunity here as well. I don't really agree with this price. And the reason I say that is, again, let's start with Rick Glenn here. Who is Rick Glenn to be, or I'm sorry, not Rick Glenn, Gavin Tucker, who just fought Rick Glenn. Why is he favored over a guy like Choi when you look at the quality of opponent here? Against Tucker, look, he's a good enough striker to, give everything that Choi can handle and then some for sure. And he has a little bit of wrestling, but he's also 4 inches shorter, 8 inches of reach, and hasn't fought in almost 2 years. And so, when you lose that badly to a guy like Rick Glenn, who kind of went by the wayside as a shot fighter at the time, Choi is a relentless slugger, and he has all the cardio in the world. And this is just a really bad style matchup for a guy like Gavin Tucker. So definitely would lean with Choi on the prelims there at a pretty nice price.
All right, now I know that there is one big favorite you like on the prelim card. Maybe looking at this one, I don't know if you're thinking about a straight bet or one of those money line parlays on the big favorites that we talked about, but who's that heavy favorite that you do like and that you probably will find a way to play?
Yeah, either in the under market, inside the distance. You look at a guy like Hakeem Dawodu at 9-1. Top prospect coming into the UFC in 2018, comes in 42nd loss to Danny Henry, and got a couple decisions over guys that are Austin Arnett, Kyle Bochniak, who's a decision machine. So Dawodu's kind of underwhelmed a little bit coming in as this vicious knockout power. All 6 of his wins via knockout, and they are life-changing knockouts. So I think that this price is actually the most warranted on the card for sure. The Dawodu should go out there. Like, this is obvious what the UFC wants here. They want Dawodu to get his knockout, to put some eyes on him, show that finishing power, and he should be able to get the UFC what they want out of him. This I think is going to start out a little slow, back and forth in the first round, and eventually Dawodu is going to end this one via knockout. The chin on Hari is just nothing to write home about. That is for sure. I know, he came in at 6-0 for him, and it hasn't really worked out for him inside the UFC as well. Being finished along the way as well. So this is just a really bad style matchup for Hari, and a great one for Dawodu to kind of a showcase. Let the UFC what this kid is all about, because he has, dare I say, Ngannou type levels of power and knockout potential.
Well, hopefully we'll have a lot more to talk about, at least from a pick standpoint next week for the UFC on ESPN card. You can check out Christian's write-up over at bangthebook.com for UFC 240 here. Of course, you can always follow Christian on Twitter at Christian Pina, P-I-N-A, and check out the Sports Gambling Podcast as well. Christian, always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right, man. I promise, guys. We have much greater fights coming up than this card, but the top two are there for you, and there is some exciting fights. So if this card isn't your cup of tea, I promise next week will be.
Well, there you go. There's Christian Pina, once again, of the Sports Gambling Podcast at Christian Pina, P-I-N-A, on Twitter. Coming up on Monday, new edition of the Bettor's Box, my MLB betting podcast. We'll be on all 5 days again next week on Bang the Book Radio. I'll let you know what that schedule looks like on Monday. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again after the weekend.